Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly live stream, where all the magic happens. We need an official catchphrase. Do we have one of those? Have we ever had one of those? If anybody wants to put an official catchphrase suggestion in the troll box is live and ready to read. So let your friends know that we can indeed see all the stuff you're saying, and and we'll probably post the funny stuff. So. Everybody, thank you for watching. It is 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you should like, subscribe, and hit the alert bell. Also, please patronize our sponsors, because we need them. That's it. We need the sponsors. So check out RockWallet. RockWallet has been our longest-term sponsor here on the show. They are a completely non-custodial wallet that gives you control of your own keys, but they also have a super swap feature that you can use if you're willing to do just a wee little bit of KYC. And ultimately, it lets you swap between your Bitcoin forks and your Ethereum and some stable coins. And among those stable coins are the new money stable coin, which got all kinds of interesting press over the weekend at the BSV Hackathon. So lots of stuff coming in the money front, and I think you people are going to be pleasantly surprised. We also have the Otherworldly TCG folks as our second sponsor of the show, who will be giving out a whole deck of cards to the comment of the day. So if you have a really good comment and it makes it to the comment of the day, if you can get it past the censorship board, well, then by all means, you are going to be rewarded by Otherworldly. So thank you, Otherworldly, formerly Champions TCG, and formerly the Champions of Otherworldly Magic, and formerly Coom Battles, for those of you who are OG on the TCG front here on the BSV blockchain. That's a lot of acronyms, and if you're new here, I am sorry. It's the best we can do. So I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr., doing this live from typically sunny South Florida, but we are having a whole chain of thunderstorms coming through here. We got dumped on about an hour ago, and I'm hearing it may happen again. So just a little warning, if I suddenly go dark here, it is entirely because of the weather, not because of lack of professionalism on my part. It is never actually my fault if anything goes wrong on this show. So remind your friends, Kurt is infallible when the camera's rolling. Okay, I have problems. I have problems in my real life, but when the camera's on, everything I say is the truth, even if it didn't start out that way when I start to say it. So tell your friends we're live. We will be taking questions from the troll box, and our guest will be one Alexander Mann, who I typically call Alex, and some people get a little cagey about the like, hey, Jim, and they're like, it's James, or like, hey, Mike, and hey, man, it's Michael. So we're going to clarify that with Alexander when we come onto the air here in a little bit with Mr. Mann, and we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of the cool stuff that he's up to, and he's frankly up to a lot more cool stuff than most people. He's one of those guys who says, yeah, I'll do that, and I'll do that too, and I'll do that too, and then ultimately does them really well. So a lot of lessons to be learned from folks like Mr. Mann. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this weekend, just briefly, and a little bit about my article of the day, which is my pinned post on X currently. But it was the BSV Hackathon. I gave a whole postmortem on the BSV Hackathon. If you want to read about it, you can go ahead and read about it. Long story short, it was awesome. I was very impressed with Ty Everett, who is a colleague from the BSV ecosystem, who I've known for a few years now, but just pretty casually. He's always just been one of the guys just doing stuff. But goodness, did his team do a really good job putting together this hackathon. And then ultimately, we've worked quite a bit more closely with him over the last 6 months on like SDK stuff and some of these toolkits and ultimately defining a lot of the stuff going on in the BSV ecosystem. And it has really gotten pretty darn impressive. And I'm super bullish on the stuff that was accomplished. I was a little bit like coming into it, was like, I don't know, maybe there'll be 4 or 5 teams, probably be 10 people, the typical faces that you see at these things. Let's go to Austin, have a good time. And then I show up and there's like 30 people in the room. There's more than a dozen teams, many of which are people who I've never met before, people with really good ideas, lots of people from other blockchains, a couple of guys with no blockchain development experience at all, and coming out with really good ideas. So it was really encouraging, frankly, to see lots of good people jump right in, come up with big ideas, and there were prizes handed out to a lot of good people. So I'm really pumped to see what happens over the next 3 to 6 months on some of these projects, and then over the next year on some of the other ones. But really good stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get Mr. Mann on a little bit here. So I am going to take a little breather. I'm going to wet the whistle a little bit. We're going to let the ad play from RockWallet, who, again, we are very grateful for. And then, yeah, we're going to have a pretty good show here. So tell your friends. We're doing this live. The more live viewers we get, the more... let's see what happens. The tariffs go away, maybe. Maybe the tariffs go away if everybody watches the show. So tell your friends. I don't know. Well, this isn't a politics thing. A couple people just got really mad. I can feel it. All right, everybody. We will be right back. What's up, Alex? So I always call you Alex. Is it Alex? Is it Alexander? What do you prefer? Like, where are we? Let's start there.
Yeah, Alexander for first time appearances, but Alex for friends and family.
That works. All right. So we're gonna keep it Alex here. But for anybody else, when you need to shake hands at a conference, please, it's Alexander. So. So you and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and you're up to all kinds of cool stuff. Do you want to talk about some of the cool stuff first? You want to talk about the hackathon first? I'm gonna let you lead it for.
Yeah. I think I'll do a brief intro just for those who don't know me. So my name is Alexander Mann. I have a background in technology and agriculture. Grew up in a rural county in Northern Virginia. And then got into the semiconductor industry for a little bit, the tower crane engineering job for a little bit, but ultimately after COVID, I wanted to do something that gave me purpose, and I like solving problems. And after doing some research, I found that the agricultural industry was really just lacking in tech adoption, and that's over every cycle of new emerging technology over the past 100 years or so. And so I was like, I'm gonna get into that and solve, bring tech to farms and grow smarter with technology. And since then, the past year or so, I just had my 1-year anniversary with the BSV Blockchain Association doing public policy outreach. And really what I do there is just showcase the narrative of what can blockchain do for communities? What can blockchain do for government enterprises? What can blockchain do for business? Really focusing on the practical use cases and telling stories and highlighting this mysterious technology that is often difficult to educate and describe on. But
for sure,
that's a little bit about me.
So let's talk a little bit about the public policy stuff to start. Because I think a lot of people, you get lost in how many layers of government even actually exist, and because there's just an incredible amount of bureaucracy when you start at local, and then your county, and then you go to state, and you have your federal, and it's like, man, how do you start this? Which is why there's like a million lobbyists employed around the country doing various things. But how do you start to get there? Like, what is a good basic inroad? How did it start for you, actually? Like, what was the process to get you working on public policy and finally able to tug on the ear of some people in power?
Yeah, so really started at the local level in the state of Virginia. So started going to town hall meetings here in my city of Harrisonburg, where I reside. And then through that, also doing research. And I found that Senator Saddam Salim from the Northern Virginia area was a patron of 2 blockchain bills in 2023 that he introduced for the 24 session. And so reached out to his office and was, talking about some of the use cases that I had. And it turned out that his office was actually looking for some examples. When emerging tech bills are introduced, usually the members of the legislative body, there are people that are just completely unfamiliar with the fundamentals of what the technology is that they're talking about or considering when it comes to legislation and regulation. And so their Senator Saddam Salim's office was looking for use cases that they could showcase and kind of bring to some of the subcommittee meetings to give testimony, or again, just opportunities for education and enrichment, bringing the tech to the legislators. So that's really where I got started. And then, you know, I have to give a shout out to Brian Daughtry, because he's really been active in the federal policy space, and kind of taken me under his wing and taught me a lot in a short amount of time. And we've been rocking and rolling in DC. We've done a few trips over the past 6 months and met with everyone from the White House to the Cryptocurrency Task Force, the Treasury, the SEC, the CTFC, the House Financial Services Committee. So there's, you know, it's interesting in some of those higher level meetings at the federal level, they, you know, some individuals were remarking at, like, you know, you guys are like one of the first that have been talking about the utility aspect and not the financial. Right. But I will say, like, you know, BSV is amazing for microtransactions and being able to send fractions of a penny. No other blockchain network can really facilitate that. No other proof of work, especially blockchain network. But it was interesting that we're kind of bridging the gap and sharing the spotlight and putting both use cases on a pedestal, the financial and the utility and the data driven.
Yeah. Well, and that's always the, you know, the difficult thing is that I think we get so mired in our key differentiators that we forget the fact that it is also a scarce asset, and all of the financial fundamentals that exist in you know, Bitcoin BTC exist in BSV literally in a 1-to-1 ratio, and therefore you know, that same, you know, the memes apply if those matter. But so it's funny. I have a little bit of experience working in politics, although it was many years ago now. I've kind of distanced myself from a volunteering standpoint, but I was a big activist and used to work primarily in Illinois politics. But I've got some experience talking to U.S. senators and Congress people and whatnot as well. And one of the things that I discovered, and this may have changed, although I doubt it, but a lot of the actual policy stuff is you're going to want to be talking to your sort of mid-level staffers, are actually the people that are going to be doing a lot of the digging in, the real work, and then ultimately passing like opinions on up to the sort of figureheads, the people who you would see on TV or doing these votes. Like, they're going to be getting, you know, a 15-minute redux sort of conversation, whereas the staffers might be doing hundreds of hours of work and actually filtering through, like, why does this matter? How can we use it? What should our policy be? And then proposing some of these policy suggestions up to their bosses, essentially. Do you find that typically to be the case, or is there a value in maybe tugging the ear specifically of a senator or congressperson and saying, hey, you know, give me 10 minutes so I can explain this at a high level, and then you can pass it to your people first? Like, how do you like to approach that?
Yeah, well, you're right on the money. In terms of order of operations, it's really the senior level staffers and the technical writing staffers in each legislator's office that are the ones doing the heavy lifting in terms of market research and fiscal impact or regulatory burden on industry and things of that nature. And so they're really the ones that are getting into the weeds and writing the definitions and writing the actual legislation. And when it comes to definitions, a single word change or a single comma can change, have ripple effects downstream once a law or once a bill is passed into law.
Sure.
And if there's ever like a court challenge or something that comes up, like that, those things are consequential. So they really try to do, have multiple eyes on it and have a very back and forth iterative process when it comes to legislation. But I feel like that's also slightly a symptom of our, the way politics works here in the United States is there's a lot of focus on getting reelected. And so there's a lot of campaigning while you're in session. And so there's a balance to be played between kind of being that figurehead and advocating for your position and representing your district as a legislative representative, because you want to serve again, but it's a balance. So rarely do we meet directly one-on-one with the the representative. We're usually meeting with the senior level staffers or the technical writers within their office, kind of talking about our use cases, talking about the technical knowledge in terms of blockchain protocol, and having creative conversations around those types of things.
That makes sense. There's been a big shift, speaking in terms of politics over the last few months. The previous administration was antagonistic, to say the least, from both a regulatory and enforcement standpoint. A lot of people really hated Gary Gensler and a lot of the things going on there. And now it's been a big 180. Lots of clarity on the just go do it has kind of been the attitude from the new administration. But also, they're just kind of getting out there and going and doing it themselves in a lot of ways. So, how much, from the executive branch, I mean, the change is obvious. How much is that filtering out to the other people you're talking to? Are you seeing people that perhaps were timid about their positions 6 months or a year ago who are now like, oh, thank God we get to have some breathing room? Or what's the trickle down effect that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I definitely was opposed to the last administration's stance on really red taping innovation, we'll call it. I'm all for sensible regulation to protect consumers and constituents, and there has to be a healthy balance there between regulation and innovation. And looking to at the larger global theater is other nation, like China, Russia, India, Japan. They're all embracing emerging technology and moving forward with it. And for the United States to maintain its relevance in the, from an economic standpoint, really and a innovation standpoint, we really need to embrace these things. And that's with the new administration coming in. I'm very hopeful, and that the change of tone or the temperature in the room has really changed, it seems, to a more collaborative, decisive. They aren't going to get it 100% perfect. No one does. We're all human. But I'd rather see more progress in a shorter amount of time than taking years and years and studies after studies to come to one decision or one bill getting passed. You and I both know how quickly the tech space is moving right now, and it just seems to be accelerating by the week with no shortage of AI releases and
Indeed.
The like. So I'm hopeful that this administration gets it right. It seems like they are more pragmatic and forward thinking, and they are moving the most expeditiously that I've seen government move in my entire life. So
big time.
Take that for what it's worth.
I think that's really been the most interesting shift in tone. Like, however you feel about the politics of the Trump administration, and I know if I just looking at the people in the troll box, like I know I have Democrats and Republicans and then lots of independents just based on who I see and conversations that I've had with them. But I think the interesting thing is at the very least, President Trump wants to figure out ways to give America a competitive edge in as many ways as possible. Like that seems like his core value is to outcompete primarily China, but even people who have traditionally just kind of been allies and we're okay. And we're seeing, tariffs against like Switzerland, for example. And it's like, I'm looking at the Swiss trade deficit and saying, pretty interesting that you're trying to put pressure on Switzerland of all places. And we buy two things from them. We buy pharmaceutical drugs and we buy luxury goods, primarily watches from Switzerland. And so somebody in that administration is saying, okay, how do we balance the trade issues that we have with Switzerland and all these things? And I find that like a fascinating poker move. And I wonder if he's doing that. And this is just me speculating, but I wonder if that's something he's doing specifically to make the argument that his 104% tariff on China that was just announced this afternoon is, that there's some kind of like relative balance and hey, everybody's got to pay their dues. And because I mean, obviously Switzerland is an ally and, there's lots of really interesting stuff going on that front. But I think, again, to reiterate, the attitude is how do we make America as competitive as humanly possible across the board? And however you feel about the how on that front, it is definitely the intent coming from the administration is to make the United States, a renewed powerhouse economically. And so AI, blockchain, and some of these things, I think are some of the key key ways that your sort of Silicon Valley types, some other people would say, hey, like we definitely need a very progressive policy on those fronts. But is there anything that you're seeing that maybe you wish there was more discussion of at the government level? Because I've been frustrated for years about the way that government sort of views the technology, primarily as an investment. For example, I've been pretty critical of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, for example. But what are your thoughts? If there's anything, if you could have, let's say, the president's ear for 1 hour, and it was, all right, Alex, you've got President Trump for an hour. You're going to explain to him your thoughts on blockchain policy for the United States for the next 4 years. What are you telling him inside of an hour, Alex?
I think, speaking in terms of personal experience and maybe drawing a little bit from personal frustrations, is that the realization, as you and I both know it, that we've had the protocol, we've had the underlying technology to solve a lot of problems in our supply chain, in our healthcare, in just in general quality of life for all of our citizens. And why aren't we using it? Why isn't it being used? And I'll speak on a couple personal things. So, my grandfather is very, I'm very close with my grandfather, and he's a retired major in the Air Force, 93, living alone in assisted living. I lost my grandmother during COVID, and he's not doing too well. And he was recently hospitalized, and we thought we were going to lose him. It was a very scary time. I was the first one to respond because I live the closest by, and I dropped everything and drove down there. But one of the key frustrations that I had with the healthcare quality that he was getting was that the healthcare, or the assisted living facility that he lives in full time, had no easy legal way to transmit his full medical records over there. And he's not, he wasn't in a condition to be able to speak. He was literally had flu type A, as well as advanced pneumonia, and he was wheezing, and like, how many people in our healthcare system, let's just say globally, even not just in America, like how many people globally, like, the healthcare that they're receiving is operating on limited information because we have this siloed, fragmented
100%.
information repository, and no easy way to share that information securely and trustlessly between parties. And that's one example where I see blockchain being able to kind of bridge the gaps and kind of break those silos down for better outcomes. Moving to the ag example would be, look at how many products are counterfeited in the market. Things like maple syrup, that's labeled as authentic, cut with corn syrup, or artificial sweeteners. And you look at the beef market and misrepresentation there. You look at honey is another good example of cut product that. And I can go on and on. And I'm a real big advocate for like using data to better outcomes, using data to better decisions. And I think that we're kind of at this intersection, now with artificial intelligence and advancements in wireless communications, with Starlink and other radio services like LoRaWAN and Halo and things of that. It kind of opens up a whole toolkit of solutions that developers can bring and apply and draw from to solve some of these problems that have been, plaguing our economy for decades now. So, those are just a couple examples that I would throw out to the president of, like, one, a general frustration of why aren't we using it to help our people, to help our citizens, and then point out some of those stories of, specific industries that, this technology can be practically applied to.
I think that's really wise. It's funny looking back. I think it might have been the second or third article I ever wrote for CoinGeek. So this would have been circa 2019. And I wrote about the problem of political data. And at the time, this was pre-COVID, the most contentious data conversation that we had was about global warming or climate change generically, right? So you come down on that issue typically based on your politics. And so if you either believe that there is or is not climate change, and then if there is a detrimental climate change, is it man-made or is it some natural cycle of just whatever? And the conversation is largely based on the fact that we don't trust each other's data. So your right wingers are not willing to trust left wing source data, and left wingers are not willing to trust right wing source data. So if you don't think there is climate change, then, well, that study was paid for by the Koch brothers or whatever. And if you do believe in it, then it's, well, but that study was paid for by the UN. And so there's this major politicization of data that makes it that we just can't agree that there is a valid set of data about what is or is not happening to global climate. And I explained that there have been, if I recall now, there was like 3 major events over the course of the last like 60 or 70 years where data about climate had simply been lost, like just through just sheer incompetence. And one was a major university. The other was a major consortium of research organizations. And I forget what the third was, but ultimately it was they were collecting the data and aggregating it and trying to keep it for the sake of studying it. And the data was just deleted at some point. And so it's just a missing chunk of, well, shoot, we don't know even what it was, and therefore we don't even know which direction we're trending up to that point. And so the argument that I was making in the article is that, hey, data like this is like really crucial data should be saved in a way that is broadly distributed and also broadly sourced, that the source of the data matters and then the storage of the data matters too. So that, perhaps in my lifetime, but maybe, like my children's lifetimes, you can look back and say, here's 75 years of global climate data. And you can see at all these points, like here's the temperature and the precipitation and the air pressure and all these other factors that can be aggregated. And at some point you can make an objective decision like, okay, are we getting warmer locally or globally, or are we getting cooler locally or globally, or what are all these other things, right? And so I think we can get past politics if we can get data right. And that strikes me as, one way to stop this like hard left-right paradigm about absolutely everything, which I find exhausting. I'm sure you do too. Trying to work in politics and getting past the, well, who said what, right? But I know this is something that is similar to another project that you're working on with more of a commercial application, but I think there is a broader ecological implication. But are you willing to discuss a little bit your commercial application of this concept?
Yeah, but first I'd like to, you've kind of activated a trap card here.
Sure. Totally fine.
Yeah. So, in terms of climate change and global warming, I think it's naive to think that, and again, these are just my personal opinions, but it's naive to think that the global manufacturing industry has zero impact on climate trends and patterns. I mean, we see that from, the environmental ecology, like the animals, the fauna, the flora, and just the species that exist. If you have a major manufacturing plant move in and set up shop, usually within a decade or less, the amount of animals and plants there significantly declines. And if you're doing advanced chromatography on soil samples and soil analyses, there will be evidence of chemicals that have found their way in. Granted, the EPA has certain, this is the acceptable safe range. Yep. But when dealing with certain more toxic chemicals that have, 1 part per billion or even 1 part per trillion toxicity to organic life forms, like that's, hard for the human brain to kind of wrap its head around at mass scale. So that's just my soapbox there. The other thing is that I am very passionate about weather in general. And one of the things that I left the tower crane engineering job that I was in right after COVID was kind of getting upset at the ESG trend in the market that we saw, and these companies using ESG as kind of a virtue signaling,
right?
And turning it into a revenue stream where consumers who are wanting to do good and reward companies that are more clean or green in their manufacturing or business operations. Kind of misrepresenting that and spinning it around into a money-making machine or a tumbler. And my whole thing was like, I'll give you an example of Vera Carbon, which was the international standard at one point in time in like 2021. there was what was it called? The BBC, I believe, or the Guardian did a 6-month undercover study of Veracarbon's carbon credit project on rainforest carbon credits, and they found that 90% of the digital assets that were minted and sold on the market were not tied to any tangible forestry or tree like physical infrastructure that was measurable. And the other more relevant example that still exists today is when you go to book a flight and travel somewhere, you usually in the checkout there will be a little ticker box that says offset your carbon footprint by
pay an extra $12.
And then I'm like, okay, well, being a little, wanting to peek behind the curtain with my curious brain, I'm like, okay, where's this money going to? How is it being invested? Ideally, you would have some sort of provenance that's tied to a distributed ledger that can be verified and auditable publicly. But that's not the case. It's largely from the projects that I've come across, or the companies that are pushing these digital assets, are smoke and mirrors and misrepresentation. And the further you dig, the more you find less truth. And that's frustrating, because in a perfect system, the small farmers and even the large companies that are doing right by the environment, doing right by their consumers, not cutting corners, not putting fillers in, not having a lesser product and still advertising it as a high quality product, or cutting corners, like those entities would be rewarded, and the bad actors would naturally, receive less revenue, because consumers can spend their dollar with a little more context. And that's ultimately what I am hoping to achieve, starting small, because you got to start somewhere. But so to that end, I have been working with farmers in the Valley, and because I'm a nerd, I have one of these little weather stations here to show. But this is the Tempest Weather Station, and I partnered with them as an American manufacturer that sells this wireless and cellular versions of this. But going back to it's all about data collection. How are we collecting the data? How is it being stored? Who has chain of custody? Is there any confirmation bias from anyone that has read-write access in the journey of that data? Something that we're looking into in terms of the farm is, if you have a large farm with a dozen or so of these deployed, and they're writing data to the blockchain, and there's a big hailstorm or a big coverable or claimable weather event in regards to crop insurance. During the claims process, it's not like the farmer has a hard drive locally that they can go in, and that the insurer is going to be like, well, how do I know that you didn't beef those numbers up a little bit to get a higher payout? And then on the, you flip that script around, the farmer, they're like, oh, sorry, we, denied your payout. You were just below the threshold for, your claim. So sorry. And then the farmer's going to be like, what? I know that it was worse than that. What are you talking about? So trying to find ways to, solve this, trust issue in market and commerce and physical transactions by relying on digital data. But, there's still a lot to be done. It's just not as simple as hashing some data from a station and putting it up. There needs to be, a standard operating procedure and best practices for, that whole journey from field to decentralized ledger.
It's hard to take raw data and turn it into the data in such a way that everybody feels satisfied with it. And actually, your insurance versus farmer example is a really great example, where that data is hyper relevant in keeping both parties honest, because both parties have histories of being dishonest when it suits them, and that's a very human trait to exaggerate something in your favor, right? And I think that's why we have politics and remediation and laws and courts and all this stuff in the first place. Is like, nobody thinks they're the bad guy. And so it's a fascinating problem to tackle, especially when you start to get into like privacy and these kind of things too. I get a lot of people who criticize me because they know I'm very much like a libertarian type, and then I get the people who will tell me like, Kurt, this blockchain data thing is really cool, but how do we protect the people who want to participate in society but just don't want to have their data collected by anybody ever anywhere. And I think that can be a valid concern, especially given, if it's deployed wrong and then that's just how things are done, like it can become a big negative. Do you see, from your work, is there an aversion to doing things right? And this is actually my biggest qualm with government integration into blockchain as a first, is I want to see this thing come from, groundswell. People are using it well, and then it becomes so ubiquitous that the government is sort of plays catch up. But everybody's basically done a bad job with it. Like, it's essentially all like predatory trading and pump and dumps and all of this stuff. And actually, like, our groundswell culture is largely toxic. And so it really worries me that the toxicity then is the thing that trickles up. And then it becomes this, like, okay, look, everybody's been bad. And now it's a instant monitored, like, tax situation and all these other things where it's like, okay, so I think the technology, because technology is benign in and of itself, it is amoral, that the way that it's deployed and the way that it's used, that it'll ultimately be taxed and regulated the way that we use it, regardless of how it's intended. And I wonder, what are some practical steps we can take culturally, or as businesses or whatever? What are some practical steps that we can take to make sure that this stuff gets deployed in a way that actually creates that kind of efficiency and trustworthy data, but also respects the privacy of people that do have good intentions, and we're not trying to use the technology simply for, crypto jacking or tax avoidance and those kind of things? It's kind of a long question, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, yeah, change is scary, right? People don't like change, and I come across more often than not, like, the whole "if it ain't broke, don't fix it," and also sometimes ego can come into play in terms of, like, feeling like you're not intelligent because there's this, new technology and you're maybe not familiar with it in your day to day. And when you are exposed to it, instead of, having an open mind and being curious to learn more, you kind of wall yourself off in defense, because you don't want to jump in that pool, so to say. I think there are a lot of historical examples, though, that we can look to in terms of the going back as far as the ag revolution,
Sure.
10,000 BC, to more recently, like the Industrial Revolution, the internal
Sure.
combustion engine.
Yep.
I live just an hour away from where one of the first harvesters in ag was
Yeah.
created, and that displaced a lot of jobs, but it also allowed us to harvest and create a abundance of food and
Yeah.
goods, which allowed cities to become bigger and society, the supply chains to expand. So with any new, and going even further to recently, with like the internet revolution, like the early 90s, where there weren't standards and there wasn't the IEEE and all of these protocols to facilitate cross-border transactions and payments and data. So it's always an uphill battle, and there's a bell curve to adoption with any new technology. I think the challenge that we're facing now is that the gaps between the innovations are kind of compressing or becoming shorter. We're having less time to really adapt and transition with the pace at which the technology is progressing. And so, I think having conversations like you do every week here is one great way, like just getting out and talking about the technology, talking about the issues.
Yep.
And something that Brian and I are trying to focus more on, is like demo days, and
Yeah.
bringing the tech to the legislators, or to these events. I've even been doing some outreach to the local university here in my town, James Madison University, and they have a blockchain club that they started 3 years ago. They had like less than 30 members when they first started it. Now they're over to 100.
Wow.
And so, doing some outreach with them, and, kind of finding ways to bridge the gap between the JMU Blockchain Club and then bring some of their concerns or their insights to the General Assembly in the state of Virginia. We really need to focus on having more technical conversations and difficult conversations, and considering, as this technology solidifies and becomes a backbone of the financial industry and the commerce and supply chain, like, what does responsible deployment look like, and how can we make sure that this is benefiting and not harming? And to the last point is that we need to have more of an opt-in framework where I believe that through blockchain that's possible. Like Tim Berners-Lee talked about it in his 30-year letter or whatever, in regards to like the way that Web 2, as soon as you log online, like you are the product, your data is being harvested and monetized and taken from you, and you're being almost disenfranchised in some ways. Imagine a Web 3 where we are the custodians of our data. We choose what we share. We choose the degree to which we participate with the system. I think there's a healthy medium and balance. And there are some fundamental things like KYC and AML that are just best practices. And if you're participating in a global economy or a national economy, like, there has to be a bar somewhere. Like it's, there's certain services that are rendered that you can't have on a completely anonymous, and there's just my opinion. But
no, I agree. I look at the sort of cypherpunk ethos, and it reminds me a lot of other things like hard activism that are inspiring in many cases, but also don't scale because of the complexity of a lot of these issues. I always bring up pirate radio, for example. So you get like a big antenna and you broadcast, and it can go maybe 15 miles in every direction, but that's it, because you need to have broader influence in order to scale that out. So you can hit your neighborhood as a cypherpunk activist, but you can't make everybody that, because it just is fundamentally lacks the ability to scale. And it's a funny thing, because I think a lot of people feel really disempowered, unempowered. I don't know what the word would be. I think disempowered, which may not actually be a word, but I think it expresses it well. Disenfranchised. You get the people that look at politics now, and like there's this whiplash effect both directions, where politics on this side, I think the best example right now is Tesla. In less than a year, went from a darling of the progressive left and the environmental movement and all of these things, where, hey, like this is a very simple way to practically reduce emissions and all these things. It's great, right? It's actual measurable green technology in the fact that it is not giving off emissions in our cities and all these things. And now it has shifted heavily to, I mean, I drive a Tesla, and I've had two people now be like, what are you, some kind of like a Nazi or whatever? And I'm like, okay, like, first of all, it's a 3-year-old car. So can we start with like when it would have been purchased and whatever. But like, so you're immediately starting by having an insane conversation with what strikes me as a really unreasonable presumption. But with all those things, I think people need to have very practical ways to involve themselves. And I'm curious, in your opinion, what is the best way for people to involve themselves politically and about any issue, but maybe primarily about blockchain and policy and those kind of things. But what are some other practical ways that the individual can just get themselves involved in the technology part of it too? So like on the hierarchy side, like how do I contact my congressman, and what would be an appropriate way to contact your congressman about blockchain policy? And then B, what's a really practical way to do something grassroots to, hey, I'm going to teach my neighbor about this tech, and they can teach their neighbor and start to spread the grass fire that way.
Yeah, so there's a tool that I use, and it's free. It's called Legiscan, Legiscan. And you're able to filter through nationally by state all of the bills for keywords or key topics. And
cool.
You're also able, if you find a bill that you're interested in or that's relevant to you, if you create a free account, you can add a certain amount of bills to your profile, and it'll It'll send you an email or a text alert as soon as there's any votes or activity in the subcommittee or whatever. You can kind of track the bill through the process. It also does a good job at listing the sponsor and then co-sponsors or patrons. And in that regard, like if you find something that matters to you in your state, whatever it may be, especially blockchain related or emerging tech, you just look at the who is the sponsor and who are the co-sponsors, and then that's publicly available information for their offices, and just write an email, like just reach out, call as well. Like those are good methods. And like during some of my meetings and going to like even federal legislators' offices and waiting in the waiting room, like I'll hear staffers that's job is just to take calls, and they actually write stuff down. They actually do filter out relevant feedback and then move that up the chain. So ideally, I'd personally like to see more of that. Like I really encourage people to get involved in the legislative process and let their voices be heard in constructive ways through creative conversations, through connecting and understanding one another, and meeting somewhere in the middle. Like it just seems like things are so polarized right now. And you gave a great example earlier with the whole, Tesla debacle and Elon Musk. But, we're all American, citizens here. Like let's find some common ground and move forward together. I mean, the amount of potential that we have with blockchain technology, with artificial intelligence, with IoT, like is unbound. And I just really like to see more community and more connection, because it seems like everything's so polarized and we're being pitted against each other, which shouldn't be the case.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize just how much even getting 3 to 5 people that they receive, a nicely written letter or a phone call about an issue, like over the course of a month or two, and be like, hey, it seems like my constituents care about this issue. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, get to work on, like, we need a position on this thing. Because I think so many people, because they feel so disenfranchised, they feel disconnected from the process, that, well, nobody's going to listen to me, that actually so few people actually go through the steps to do it, that when you do, it's like, oh, you care about that issue? Like, well, then, like, I'm your congressman, then I care about this issue, And so I think people assume the process can't work, and so they don't try. And in reality, like I've found politicians very responsive to a respectful call or a letter. And so it's a fascinating
I think
thing.
largely the political process has been kind of obfuscated by special interests in terms of, just making it more complex and more hard to understand. And that's where I say, like, for the first time in history, we have AI tools and we have, the potential of blockchain accountability. We were talking about some, chain of custody and confirmation bias and things that blockchain can solve. But more importantly, with AI, like you can have a conversation with ChatGPT or with Google Gemini or any of these frontier models that now have internet connectivity search functions, and really learn about the process or track down a bill that you're interested in and figure out when those subcommittee hearings are, and, show up to the General Assembly in your state and just speak, because there, by law, if a bill is being considered, there's a time for public comment and review. And, it like I understand that a lot of people work full-time jobs and it's hard for them to participate in the political process. But even then, you can have a conversation about how you feel about a topic or an issue with artificial intelligence, and it can help craft that letter that you send, or it can generate that phone transcript that you call in and just read from. So, the barriers to entry and participation have been reduced by the technology, and that is something that I'm hopeful for.
Big time. Are you so, man, we only have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything key that you'd like to discuss that maybe we haven't approached? Because I want to make sure you get out the stuff that's you're working on and excited about.
Yeah. So I actually met with the first winery that I deployed the Tempest monitoring blockchain solution on 3 years ago. They have taken that grape or the grapes from that first year of monitoring, and they processed them, and they're getting ready to bottle them. And designing the label, and they're actually going to be printing a QR code on the back of the actual label of this vintage that will link. Just another show and tell. Link to a vintage report. So it's going to have like a little section on climate. It's going to have the test results of like the alcohol percentage, the bricks sugar levels, and just stats on how many bottles were made in cases.
That's cool.
What fruit it is, what it was aged in, where the fruit came from. And if it's a blend, it lists the different grapes that went into it in the orders, any accolades right here, some pairing recommendations, and most importantly, a blockchain stamped certificate of authenticity. So we're hashing the PDF file itself that the QR code is going to. And the digital version of this, you're able to, click on the blockchain link or click on the logo for the business of the winery, and it'll take you to their website. So we're trying to find ways to bridge that gap and bring true utility to the wine industry, and kind of use this as an example of other places that this type of experience could be deployed in other sectors of the economy.
Very cool. Here's a funny question. Speaking of wine and corks, the infamous cork that was popped, who owns it? That was auctioned. We auctioned it, I don't know, 2021 or something. It was paid for, and the proceeds went to a Florida charity. But so by all means, use the blockchain to do. It was I think we used Relay X. I'm trying to think back how we did the whole thing, but the cork was auctioned and sent with a certificate of authenticity. I've got some photos somewhere, and actually the photos of it are on the blockchain too. So I'll have to go through my notes and pull that up. I actually forgot about the cork, so that's good stuff. But I do not have it. Yeah, we auctioned it. We shipped it.
Wine.
Yeah, no, it was for a fancy brand too. I just forget. I'm not much of a wine guy, so I will forget such things. Very cool. Any other questions? Let's bring up Mr. Producer. I saw you had a couple things starred. Something good for Mr. Mann here. Verified data such as wide-reaching applicability. How could it impact public budgets? Is the accountability it represents an obstacle when the corruption is often beneficial to I think legislature? It is a good question. It's actually been one of my concerns about everything. When we're like, hey, we can fix the data problem. Like, there's lots of people who are basically good people, but are making a little bit of extra money on the my side deal is going to get killed by this. How much of an obstacle is that at every level, frankly?
Yeah, I will go back to the tangible example of just the Vera Carbon. We're being a trusted third party, and they're making money off of printing digital assets that aren't tied to anything physical backed. And if we had a perfect system where there weren't bad actors or the fallibility of humans, we wouldn't necessarily need all these extra chain of custody and supply chain verification and whatnot. But unfortunately, the reality is what it is, and we need to find ways to use these tools to just have better insight and quantification of what's real and what's not, so that we can, the power of the dollar, the power of commerce and purchasing something. Like, when you buy a brand, you're investing in that entire supply chain. You're supporting that company, good and bad. And I think that, we as consumers, we as constituents or, citizens have a civic duty to be more educated. And, it goes both ways, but in having the tools to be more educated, but also a system that thrives on transparency.
Yep. Well, I think even, people will bring up examples, like international freight has a 15% like fraud rate on quantity. If you put X amount of pallets on a ship, like how many of them are going to be lost at individual ports and that kind of thing. And like, if that number is currently an 85% success rate and you can get it up to 90%, like that's, I don't think anybody thinks that we're going to make the world a perfect place because blockchain technology, right? There's going to be people that game the system in any situation, but making it notably better by any metric is ultimately a good thing. So, perfectionism, I think, is a nice value in many ways, but it also limits people people making decisions that could make marked progress that is, still imperfect. Here's another good one, and actually one that I struggle with consistently. What would you tell the president about Tether?
Yeah, I have to claim ignorance on this one, just because my purview and scope of relevance is really on the utility side of things. I recognize the benefits of the financial aspects of blockchain protocols and different chains, but really the converse, like what I'm fighting for, it like a tangible example would be the Fit 21 bill when it was first introduced last year by Senator Elizabeth Warren and some of the backers from the banking, like Jamie Dimon, was that it would have the way the definition was written, any transaction on a decentralized ledger would have been labeled as a security. And so even my weather station postings or my hash of the vintage report, when you scan the QR code, like those would be securities. And like, that's just asinine and completely detached from the reality of what the technology is and what it's doing. So sorry, I don't have a more concrete answer for that.
No, that's okay. Now, and I think that's it actually points to the fact that the technology can be used for completely different things, right? It's like the internet itself. It's a general purpose communications technology. And so like, there's a whole financial aspect to it, but there's also like benign social media or, playing video games, like that kind of thing is all
securities.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You did what in Super Mario? Yeah. It's like, all right. So, all right. Final thoughts. Any final word? Where can we learn about all the stuff you're up to? Because you're up to a bunch of cool stuff. What's the best way to keep in touch and follow what you're up to?
Yeah, so follow me on X at Alexander Mann. I think it's right here. My smartgrowagritech.com, vineyardvantage.com. Working very closely with the Smart Ledger team. Shout out to Greg Ward, Sean, and Brian, the guys over there. And we're staying active. We'll be posting regular updates and social media posts and whatnot. So definitely stay updated with us.
Awesome, Alex. Always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Will I see you in London in October?
You will, and I'm looking forward to it.
Love it. All right, man.
Thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate the time.
For sure. See you soon. Bye. All right. So let's take a minute here to just digest. It's a lot of stuff to digest. I don't like to get political as a rule because I want to keep the show focused on the tech. But when we're talking about government and stuff, it's hard to take that stuff in balance, especially when it comes to your money and your data and all these things. I firmly believe that ultimately data is money, but ultimately it's this underlying value of things, and being able to own and lease things in a way that's appropriate and benefits the individual ultimately makes people more free by the fact that you can monetize the things that can't otherwise be monetized. I think most of the ways that we've become less free is in the ways that we don't understand. Like, I think most people don't understand how they're being monetized by Facebook and Google and X and some of these other platforms. They don't realize that they are the asset. And if you can not teach people, you don't have to tell people this information, but if you can show them, hey, you could be earning money by utilizing this technology instead of that, because there is a value that you don't know that you're losing. It's essentially leaking out the backside of your digital footprint. That can be a way that shows people that, hey, okay, I deserve some of the value that I'm creating simply by existing here in this paradigm. And that might be the best way to get people to understand, the rest of their sovereignty bubble that they could be enforcing themselves. So like most things, it's incentives that make the world go around. And if you can incentivize people to understand and fight for their own rights in a way that is actually practical, then ultimately it's a good thing. So Alex is a good dude. I've known him for a couple of years, and we've talked about a lot of these projects in private ways that I can help, because he's doing the real work. He's one of the people that takes the advice of, hey, somebody's got to get out there and do these things, and he's out there doing them. So you should give Alex a follow and pay attention to the stuff he's up to, because it's really cool. We need to take a minimal break. We're going to do a short ad here before the top of the hour. We're going to choose the comments of the day, and we will be right back.
Choose your hero. Aldrich Soyhammer, Divine Crusader.
The time is now, champion. To war!
Jesus the Risen.
Blessed be the cheddar.
Boris, Protector of Innocence.
I'm all natural.
Solrend, Scythe of the Damned.
Your soul is mine. No refunds.
Lilith, Princess of Hell.
Self-destruction is an art.
Wagyu, Tasty Samurai.
High-grade beef with a killer instinct.
Skibbity,
Skibbity.
Brain Rot Incarnate.
Skibbity dot dot.
All right, let's do the comment of the day. Go for it. Where's the clip? There we go. The infamous cork. Do we have a graphic, or are we just going to talk about it? All right, congratulations, Ram G. Please send a DM to Real CoinGeek at Real CoinGeek on X, and it will be distributed thusly. Everybody, thanks so much for spending your hour with us. We are live every single Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you would be so kind, like, subscribe, hit the alert bell, let your friends know that we do these, and your comments really, really, really help. So if you could comment on the video after we are done being live, that helps push it up the algo. Let our digital overlords know that you do indeed want to consume my content. Remember always to be good to each other, because if we cannot do that, then the rest of it doesn't matter at all. And yeah, so let's change the world. Don't be afraid to reach out to your congressmen or your senators, and actually don't be afraid to reach out to Alex or Brian or some of the people working at the BSVA in regards to like their sort of public policy advocacy and these things too. They might be willing to help. They might need a friend in your jurisdiction, and if you've got decent connections or a valid opinion, that kind of information can actually help them with practical personal examples and say, hey, I have a person that I know. You'll hear politicians do these and say, Jane in Tennessee has this issue that I really care about politically right now. And you always wonder, are those stories real? But if you give that story to the kind of people that advise public policy, gives you that opportunity. Sounds like the music's telling me to go. So they're telling me to wrap it up, everybody. I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. Thanks again. And we will talk to you next week. Take care and goodbye.